Speech, the fundamental basis of all communication on the planet. Mankind's ability to speak is what has elevated us above other species on the planet, and we use it, in one way or another, every day of our lives. It is estimated that mankind began to develop the ability to speak around 100,000 years ago, but the exact specifics of that development remain a mystery. It is the first stage of learning we are encouraged into by our parents, and has led to the formation of written languages and other forms of communication as well.
In short, human evolution as we know it would not have been possible without the ability to speak.
In the last 200 years, however, there have been major developments in this ability to communicate through speech. This short clip demonstrates one of the earliest man-made recordings of a voice, recorded on Thomas Edison's tinfoil phonograph around 1877. While incredibly crude and poor quality, this paved the way for sound recording in the 20th and 21st century, and with the advent of the telephone a year earlier, both inventions gave rise to a new phenomenon, the recorded disembodied voice. Now, in 2016, this is extremely commonplace, with disembodied voices appearing everywhere in our daily lives, from mobile phones, radio, podcasts and music.
Absolutely, and that was California-based punks, I guess you could say.
And even on public transport.
Platform 2 from the 1425 East Midlands trains, service to Nottingham.
Systemic automation has led to machines being able to speak through recorded voices. But this does lead to a question. How, in a world where disembodied voices are everywhere, do we orally perceive vocal traits? The human brain stores information throughout our lives as we communicate. But does that mean that by hearing the voice, we can identify what a person does or should look like?
Just by hearing my voice, you will immediately form a picture in your mind as to what you think I look like. However, this may be slightly different to what you were expecting.
Most people in their lives will experience this phenomenon, especially when meeting someone new that you may have only communicated with on the phone. Hence the classic awkward encounters on blind dates of, "Oh, I thought you'd be taller," or "I thought you sounded older on the phone." For this documentary, I have conducted my own research into this phenomenon, and aim to answer if and why we can identify certain voices and vocal traits, and try to understand why this might be. The first experiment conducted was titled First Impressions. In it, participants were asked to listen to a series of audio clips and attempt to identify which voice went with the photos they were presented with, and give a brief explanation for their answer. The aim of this is to try and understand if there is a proven trend and way of identifying people from their voice, or if in reality, people's perceptions have no reflection on an individual's actual appearance. The following audio is a sample from the test. See if you can identify which of the following 3 photos the voice belongs to.
Hi, my name's John and I'm studying music technology at De Montfort University.
If you haven't worked out the answer yet, here's the audio one more time.
Hi, my name's John and I'm studying music technology at De Montfort University.
The answer? The one on the left.
Taking a closer look at the participants individually, there are some key things to note. Firstly, with John, only 30% of people guessed his voice correctly. This was a higher percentage than any of the other answers, though it doesn't form an overall majority. People did tend to mention the fact that John looked slightly older than the rest of the participants, and therefore would lend to a slightly older voice. However, the voice they identified was not John's. In fact, the one that people tended to pick was in fact Rich's, who's one of the youngest participants. Taryn scored an overall percentage of 25, along with 2 other answers, which was in fact George and John. Both of them had slightly regional accents, as did Taryn, and therefore I think that people in this experiment were looking more at the idea that he would have a slightly regional, mostly quoted as Midlands accent. But as I say, still failed to identify him as an overall majority. Moving on to participant 3, George. Most people thought George was rich, holding nearly 40% of the vote, and the rest was roughly evenly split. People commented that George looked young, youthful, happy, and in one case, northern and looks a bit like a member of the Cribs, though that person actually guessed that George's voice was in fact Taryn's. With nearly 30% of the vote, the standout selection for Rich was actually Chris's voice. Most people described as looking for a hipster voice, though most people who said that actually ended up picking John's voice, which was a bit strange, as I know John, and he's not exactly what you describe as a hipster. With the highest percentage vote so far, most people in fact thought that Niall was George, saying that he sounded slightly nerdy and possibly more intelligent. Though I will admit, I suspect most of this was down to the fact that Niall is the only participant taking part in this with glasses. With Craig, just over 40% of people thought he was in fact rich, with Craig himself coming in at just under 30%. People seem divided on whether Craig's voice would be high-pitched or low-pitched, with some people describing him as babyface, whilst others saying he looked like a larger guy with a deep voice. Participant number 7, Chris, yielded a particularly interesting result, with absolutely nobody actually guessing Chris's voice was Chris's. He was fairly evenly spread across all of the others though, however, with no clear correlation as to which voice people actually thought he was. Looking at the comments though, you can understand why. Most people described him as a normal looking guy, slightly gruff, but difficult to determine from the rest of the group. And finally, John number 2. John was the closest to being identified, with over 40% of the vote going to his own voice. However, I do feel this is a bit of an anomaly, as in fact several participants put the only reason I picked this voice is because it was the only one left. And looking back through their answers, most of their answers were incorrect. So, overall, not a single one of the participants was identified by an overall majority, lending further credence to the idea that in fact, people cannot tell people apart based on their voices alone, and in fact, their entire basis for this is based on their own personal experience. A case in point for this would be one of the answers given to Chris, and I quote, "He sounds like a friend of mine who looks like this." The voice they picked was in fact Niall's. Therefore, they have a friend who looks like Chris but sounds like Niall, a perfect example of this in motion.
One person who might understand this better than most is local radio presenter James Hickley.
Here's some new songs and support local music because one day Muse and all this lot.
I caught up with him to ask him why he thought most people had a tendency to create false images of people in their heads. So James, when you first started doing radio, did you ever really think about what people might be thinking about what you looked like when you sort of started?
Yeah, I've always had this thing where people have always thought that I was older than I was whenever I speak. It's really, I think it's the natural baritone or something. I don't know. Like
Just holding a slightly gravelly voice.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I've always thought that people have thought that I was slightly older. I'd say. When I think with the radio as well, I've been confused a couple of times with people who've been listening in as like a community member, as somebody who's like 30 or 40 or something like that. Because we've got the guys who come in at that point, and
yeah,
that always seems that's pretty strange, I have to admit. But yeah, there is a bit of a disconnect between it, I think.
Have you ever tried to sort of adjust your voice in any way to sort of give it a certain image? Like, do you try and conjure in your head kind of like am I trying to sort of give off a cool vibe or whatever that I want people to picture this when they're listening to my show?
My show in particular it's kind of laid back and chilled out, so I kind of just talk. But I do every now and again when I'm trying to sort of promote something, try to be a little bit more authoritative, but it doesn't really work. And I think the whole point is that when I try it, like it's supposed to sound bad and awkward. So yeah, but I think there is a tiny bit of it. I think and I think it does work as well, but. Yeah, there is a bit of a disconnect.
Do you find that you create false images and like when you meet other presenters you'll be a bit like, oh, I didn't think you looked like that?
Yeah, definitely. As I said, I was recently on the Home Run show and I'd listened to it a couple of times in the past and I thought, oh, these guys sound really like, professional and all this type of stuff. And then I met them and they're all just like really just normal students, and laughing and joking and stuff like that. I think, people can definitely create an image on the radio, especially with like more mainstream shows that are quite organised and stuff about having a grasp on the situation when it's just as chaotic as anything else, I think, yeah.
Why do you think people end up creating these false images? Do you think people have a need to sort of, have something that they can tangibly kind of grab onto as an idea to be part of it? Or do you think that it's just people associate voices with faces?
I think because radio is the medium that it is, and it's like very personal, more so than TV or anything like that, or film. It's almost like a conversation between two people. So I think when people change their voice, it's almost like when you're talking to people in real life. There's always like a hierarchy of, you know, who's in control of the conversation and who's asking the questions. And because in radio, like, it's a one-way exchange, I think that definitely people try to not make it sort of their voice more authoritative, but kind of more sympathetic as well, so that people don't feel alienated and pushed away by it. It's not like somebody's lecturing you, it's like they're having a conversation with you, but you can't necessarily have
So
them
you
back.
almost want to create the image of it being like
Yeah.
a friend or something. Then.
Absolutely. Either friendly or somebody who you have like a respect for, who knows what they're talking about. So maybe you won't necessarily like them, but if they're talking about sort of more specialist music or something like that, it would definitely be, you know, oh, I know about this, listen to me, I have an authority on, I don't know, post-punk from the 1970s or something. And then you go, okay, yeah, that makes sense, that guy sounds like he knows what he's talking about. I think, you know, it's either that or friendship, I think, is the two things.
If you had one of your listeners come up to you in the
Yeah.
street, do you think they'd recognise you just from sort of hearing your voice and then seeing you?
I've had some people look at me strangely in a subway because, you know, we're played like in shops across town. Like, I've said, oh, can I have this? And they're just like, I think I recognise you from somewhere. But yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think they would be able to recognise me. I think after a while, but once you listen to somebody's voice for long enough, I think that you can just hear their intonations and stuff like that. So yeah, I think they would do. Yeah.
Interesting. Looking at the results we've had from the tests we've
Yeah.
done, you might be interested to know, actually, we've had zero correlation with people
Really?
listening to voices for the first time. No one has actually been identified. I mean, do you
Yeah.
think, like you said, you mentioned there briefly that it's
Yeah.
to do with over a longer period of time you might get more of an idea, but are you surprised by that?
I am actually, yeah. Maybe I'm just having a lot of confidence in myself there. I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of surprising actually. I'd have thought, particularly that people would, if it's a show that they listen to regularly. I think that's something that is quite shocking. Yeah, there must be something to do with that, less longevity and exposure, I guess, to it.
So if people can't be identified by their voices alone, what about if the process was reversed?
This is a far more normalised situation as we encounter people every day of our lives who are new, and we expect to hear different voices. However, even in those small moments, we may already have a preconception based on the person's image as to what they might sound like. The following experiment has been created using automated dialogue replacement, or ADR, and dubbing. ADR is the process of re-recording audio in sync with the actions and speech of a person on screen. Dubbing is the same process but using a different person's voice. One of the most famous examples of this is James Earl Jones' dubbed portrayal of the infamous movie villain Darth Vader. As heard here, this is a significant improvement on the original reading of the lines on set.
Start tearing this ship apart piece by piece until you find those tapes. Find the passengers of this vessel. I want them alive!
And has led to some humorous redubs over the years.
Alright, who wants to go to Space Harbors now? Anyone? No? Steve? Nah, you guys.
This process is used throughout the film industry and is far more commonplace than people realise. What you are about to hear is the same person dubbed with 3 different voices. See if you can tell the difference.
Hello, my name is Chris and I study music technology at De Montfort University. I'm from Ascot and my favourite food is chili chicken ramen. If I ever won the lottery, I'd buy my own private island and call it Zanzibar Land, like in Metal Gear Solid.
Hello, my name is Chris and I study music technology at De Montfort University. I'm from Ascot and my favourite food is chili chicken ramen. If I ever won the lottery, I would buy my own private island and call it Zanzibar Land, like in Metal Gear Solid.
Hello, my name is Chris and I study music technology at De Montfort University. I'm from Ascot and my favourite food is chili chicken ramen. If I ever won the lottery, I would buy my own private island and call it Zanzibar Land, like in Metal Gear Solid.
Worked it out? The original voice was number 2.
Hello, my name is Chris and I study music technology at De Montfort University.
So I'm now joined by Chris, who was the obviously visual participant of the previous experiment. Now, Chris, I've got a question to ask you because I have the results here. Do you think people were able to identify you by your voice and match it up to the images that they were presented with?
No.
You don't?
No.
Any particular reason?
I don't think I've got a very common voice.
You don't think that you match your appearance particularly?
No. I don't think my voice matches anyone's appearance.
That's fair enough. Well, I can happily announce that, you actually came in dead last.
Alright.
Yeah, you got 25% of participants believe that Chris, your voice was your voice. But the main reason for that was, and it's mostly to do with, it seems, the ADR more than anything else, because people were trying to sort of look for distinguishing things to determine, and a lot of the stuff that people focused on was, say for example, breathing, the mannerisms, everything else like that, and it did seem like on your version, because it was the most natural, that didn't seem that apparent. So when it was over-exaggerated on, for example, Niall's version of it, where there's sort of the sharp intake of breath, people seem to have latched onto that. But interestingly, despite the fact that universally amongst us that were actually preparing the experiment, we felt that John's was probably the least convincing dub, coming in first with people thinking you sound like John with 39%.
Great.
So yeah, I don't know what you think of that. You know, I mean, are you surprised or?
Yeah, John's got a weird voice as well.
John's got a weird voice as well.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't have picked that one. You would have thought it would have been Niall's that they'd have picked potentially over yours then.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, you know, it's a fairly even split between the two of them. I mean, you are in last with 25%, but the other two sort of are sitting on 35% for Niall's results and 39% for John's. So it's fairly even, and people were sort of picking up on the fact that yours sounded like more natural. And the people that answered it were answering saying that, you know, it sounds like it sort of flows better, sort of the room acoustic sounded more real and everything else like that, and that's how they matched up your voice. But a lot of people straight away just jumped at the fact that the other two were, you know, they seemed more exaggerated. So if you hadn't, I guess, met you before, they probably thought that perhaps this was the reason that they would, you know, go for that answer.
Alright. Cool.
But yeah.
Yeah, it's weird, that.
So what can we learn from this? Well, with systemic automation on the rise in our homes, on the streets and in our daily lives in general, it's fair to say that we're going to have to get used to disembodied voices. But what effect this will have on the human race is as of yet unclear. But in the meantime, Siri, where's the nearest pizza restaurant?
Okay, check it out.
Lovely.